In the heart of Lagos, nestled within the bustling streets and lively markets, stood a quaint little church painted white with a high steeple that pointed toward the heavens. The church was called Grace Assembly, and its congregation was tightly knit, bound by faith and community. At the helm of this house of worship was Pastor Jackson, a man whose deep voice carried sermons that stirred the soul and calmed troubled hearts. By his side was his wife, Christy, a woman who seemed to embody grace itself. Christy was adored by everyone in the congregation. She greeted everyone with a warm smile, remembered names effortlessly, and made even the smallest of children feel seen and loved. Her beauty was undeniable: smooth caramel skin, sharp cheekbones, and a glow that seemed to radiate from within. Yet it was her demeanor that charmed people most. She was gentle, humble, and seemingly flawless, a model of what it meant to be a pastor's wife. She organized women's meetings, led the church choir, and offered support to those in need. To the world, Christy was the perfect wife and mother. But behind closed doors, Christy carried a secret so heavy that not even her husband knew the burden she bore. At night, Christy often found herself unable to sleep. As Pastor Jackson snored softly beside her, she would stare at the ceiling, battling thoughts she could never confess. Her heart pounded with a desire she could not explain, and no matter how much she prayed or fasted, it would not go away. Her secret life began innocently enough, or so she told herself. A few years ago, during a church retreat, a sister in the congregation had confided in her about her loneliness. Christy had comforted her, offering a hug and kind words. But that hug had lingered too long, and something passed between them that night, something Christy had never experienced before. From that moment on, her charm became her tool. She began seeking out women in the church who were vulnerable, lonely, or simply captivated by her magnetic presence. She made them feel special, drawing them in until they could no longer resist. And when the church lights went out and the world's gaze was turned away, Christy would let herself indulge in desires she kept hidden from everyone, even herself. One Sunday morning, as the congregation settled into the church for service, a stranger walked through the doors. She was elegant, with striking features and a quiet confidence that made her stand out. Her name was Sam, and she had just moved to Lagos to start afresh after a painful divorce. Sam took a seat near the back of the church, trying to remain unnoticed. But Christy noticed her immediately. Something about Sam's presence made Christy's heart skip a beat. She found herself stealing glances at the new member throughout the service, her mind racing with questions. After the service, Christy approached Sam with her usual warm smile. "Hello there," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Christy, Pastor Jackson's wife. I don't believe we've met before." Sam smiled back, her voice soft but firm. "I'm Sam. I just moved here. Thank you for such a beautiful service." Christy's heart fluttered. "I'm so glad you're here. I hope you'll feel at home with us." Sam nodded, her eyes locking with Christy's for a moment longer than necessary. "I think I will." In the days that followed, Christy found herself thinking about Sam more than she should have. She convinced herself that it was her duty to make the newcomer feel welcome, but deep down, she knew it was more than that. She invited Sam to join the women's prayer group, and Sam eagerly accepted. During the meetings, Christy found herself drawn to Sam's intelligence and humor. Sam was different from the other women. She was confident yet kind, with a strength that seemed to come from a place of deep pain. One evening after prayer group, Christy offered to walk Sam to her car. As they strolled under the dim streetlights, their conversation flowed effortlessly. Christy found herself laughing more than she had in months, and for a moment, she forgot the weight of her secret life. "You have a beautiful spirit," Christy said suddenly, surprising herself. Sam stopped walking and turned to face her. "And you have a kind heart," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. For a moment, the world seemed to stand still. Christy felt a pull so strong it was almost physical, but she quickly stepped back, her mind racing. She was playing with fire and she knew it. Despite her best efforts, Christy couldn't stay away from Sam. She began finding excuses to spend time with her, inviting her over for tea or asking for her help with church activities. Each moment they spent together only deepened the connection between them, and Christy felt herself falling into dangerous territory. But the closer she got to Sam, the harder it became to maintain the perfect image she had worked so hard to build. She began to miss meetings and forget important church responsibilities. The other women in the congregation started to whisper, noticing that Christy was no longer as attentive as she once was. Pastor Jackson, though loving and trusting, began to sense that something was off. "Is everything okay, Christy?" he asked one evening as they sat together after dinner. Christy forced a smile. "Of course, dear. Just a bit tired from all the church work." But in her heart, she knew that the walls of her double life were beginning to crack. And with Sam now in the picture, she wasn't sure how much longer she could keep it all together. One fateful afternoon, during a women's fellowship meeting, Sister Margaret, one of the older, more observant members of the church, watched Christy and Sam with sharp eyes. She noticed the way Christy's gaze lingered on Sam, the way they leaned a little too close when they whispered to each other. Margaret leaned over to another woman and whispered, "Something isn't right about those two. Mark my words." The days following Sam's arrival at Grace Assembly were like a whirlwind in Christy's carefully controlled life. What had started as a casual friendliness turned into something Christy couldn't explain, even to herself. Every encounter with Sam left her heart racing and her mind spiraling. But the more Christy tried to resist, the stronger the pull became. She had been careful all these years to keep her secret hidden, but Sam had awakened something new in her. A desire that felt both thrilling and terrifying. One Thursday evening after choir practice, Christy offered Sam a ride home. The air between them was thick with unspoken tension as the car wove through the quiet streets. "Thank you for everything, Christy," Sam said softly, breaking the silence. "I don't know how I would have adjusted to this city without your kindness." Christy glanced at her, her hands gripping the steering wheel a little too tightly. "It's nothing really. That's what the church is for, to make people feel at home." Sam smiled, her eyes lingering on Christy. "You do more than that. You make people feel special." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Christy's breath caught, but she quickly looked away, focusing on the road ahead. "That's kind of you to say." When they arrived at Sam's apartment, neither of them moved to get out of the car. For a moment, it felt as though the world outside had disappeared, leaving only the two of them in their small, shared bubble. "I'm glad I met you," Sam said, her voice barely above a whisper. Christy's chest tightened. She wanted to respond, to confess the storm of emotions raging inside her, but fear held her back. Instead, she nodded and forced a smile. "I'm glad too." That night, Christy lay awake in bed, her mind replaying every moment with Sam. She felt as though she were being pulled in two directions. On one hand was her role as Pastor Jackson's wife, the pillar of the church and the community. On the other was the undeniable connection she felt with Sam, a connection that made her feel more alive than she had in years. She tried to pray, but the words felt hollow. How could she ask for forgiveness when she wasn't even sure she wanted to let go of what she felt? As the days passed, Christy found herself spending more and more time with Sam. They met for coffee, worked on church projects together, and shared long conversations that stretched late into the night. Each moment with Sam felt like a stolen treasure, but it also deepened the guilt gnawing at Christy's soul. The women of Grace Assembly were quick to notice the bond forming between Christy and Sam. Sister Margaret, always the first to spot trouble, had made it her mission to keep a close eye on them. "Have you noticed how close Christy and that new woman are?" she whispered to Sister Esther during a fellowship meeting. Esther frowned. "Christy's just being kind. You know how she is with newcomers." Margaret shook her head. "It's more than kindness. There's something off about it. Mark my words, Esther, something isn't right." The whispers spread, weaving their way through the congregation like a slow-burning fire. And while Christy remained oblivious to the growing suspicions, the walls of her double life were beginning to close in. One evening, as Christy and Sam sat on a bench outside the church after a midweek service, Sam turned to her with a serious expression. "Can I ask you something?" Sam said. Christy hesitated but nodded. "Of course. Why do you always seem so torn? Like you're carrying something heavy?" Christy froze. "I don't know what you mean." Sam tilted her head, studying her. "I think you do. There's a sadness in your eyes, Christy. I see it even when you're smiling." The words hit Christy like a blow. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. For years, she had buried her feelings so deeply that even she had almost forgotten they were there. But now, Sam's presence had brought them to the surface, raw and undeniable. "I'm fine," Christy said finally, her voice barely steady. "I'm just tired, that's all." Sam didn't press further, but her gaze lingered on Christy, filled with a quiet understanding that unnerved her. Despite her efforts to maintain distance, Christy found herself drawn closer to Sam with each passing day. One evening, after a church event, Sam invited Christy to her apartment for tea. At first, Christy hesitated. She knew it was a bad idea, but the thought of saying no felt impossible. Before she knew it, she was sitting on Sam's couch, a steaming cup of tea in her hands. They talked for hours, their conversation flowing effortlessly from light-hearted stories to deep, personal confessions. Sam spoke of her painful divorce and the loneliness she had felt since moving to Lagos. Christy shared bits of her own struggles, careful not to reveal too much. As the night wore on, the space between them seemed to shrink. Christy felt her heart pounding as Sam reached out and gently placed a hand on hers. "You don't have to hide from me," Sam said softly. Christy's breath hitched. For a moment, she thought about pulling away, about running back to the safety of her carefully constructed life. But instead she stayed. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Sam's hand tightened around hers. "You don't have to be." That night marked a turning point for Christy. She had crossed a line she could never uncross, and the weight of her actions settled heavily on her shoulders. As she drove home in the early hours of the morning, she felt a strange mix of exhilaration and dread. She knew she was playing with fire, but a part of her didn't care. For the first time in years, she felt alive. But deep down, she also knew that this new bond with Sam was bound to unravel the delicate balance of her life. And with the whispers in the church growing louder, it was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. The bond between Christy and Sam grew stronger with each passing day, but so did the tension surrounding them. Whispers swirled through Grace Assembly like an unrelenting wind, carrying questions and suspicions to every corner of the congregation. For years, Christy had managed to conceal her secret life, but now the cracks in her facade were becoming too visible to ignore. One sunny afternoon, Christy and Sam sat together in Christy's car, parked discreetly at the edge of a quiet street. They had just spent hours working on plans for the upcoming women's retreat, but their conversation had shifted far from church matters. "I don't know how much longer I can keep this up," Christy admitted, her voice trembling. Sam reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "You don't have to do this alone, Christy. You don't always have to be the perfect wife, the perfect pastor's wife." The words were comforting, but they also filled Christy with fear. She glanced nervously out of the window, her pulse quickening. "What if someone sees us?" she whispered. Sam frowned. "We're just talking." Christy shook her head. "You don't understand. These people, they notice everything. And if they suspect anything..." She trailed off as a figure appeared in the distance. It was Sister Margaret, walking briskly toward the church with her ever-present notebook in hand. Christy ducked instinctively, her heart racing. "Relax," Sam said, trying to reassure her. "She doesn't know anything." But Christy couldn't shake the feeling that Margaret's sharp eyes had caught more than they should have. By the following Sunday, the whispers had grown louder. Sister Margaret's observations were the spark that ignited a blaze of speculation. "I saw Christy and that new woman in her car," Margaret told a group of women after service. "They looked too close." Sister Esther furrowed her brow. "You don't think?" "I'm just saying," Margaret interrupted, her voice heavy with implication. "It's not normal. We need to pray for her, for the church." The women nodded solemnly, but the seeds of suspicion had already been planted. Pastor Jackson, oblivious to the growing storm, noticed that Christy seemed distant. She laughed less, avoided his questions more, and seemed preoccupied during their moments together. "Christy, are you okay?" he asked one evening as they sat together after dinner. She forced a smile, avoiding his gaze. "I'm fine. Just tired from all the church work." Jackson studied her for a moment before nodding, though a flicker of doubt lingered in his eyes. While Christy struggled to keep her world from collapsing, Sam began to sense the weight of their relationship. She had been drawn to Christy's warmth and charm, but now she saw the pain behind the facade. One evening, as they sat together in Sam's apartment, she voiced her concerns. "Christy, are you sure this is what you want?" Christy looked at her, startled. "What do you mean?" "I mean us," Sam said gently. "I care about you deeply, but I don't want to be the reason your life falls apart." Christy's heart ached at the words. "You're not the reason, Sam. You're the only thing keeping me sane right now." Sam reached out, taking Christy's hand in hers. "But at what cost? You're living in fear, constantly looking over your shoulder. I don't want that for you." Christy pulled away, her emotions swirling. "You don't understand. I've been hiding who I am for so long, I don't even know how to stop." Sam's eyes softened. "Then maybe it's time to stop hiding." But Christy wasn't ready to face the truth. Not yet. The tipping point came during the women's retreat that Christy and Sam had worked so hard to organize. It was meant to be a weekend of spiritual renewal, a time for the women of Grace Assembly to come together in prayer and fellowship. But for Christy, it became a weekend of reckoning. On the second night of the retreat, Sister Margaret had taken it upon herself to investigate the growing rumors about Christy and Sam. Under the guise of needing something from Christy's room, she knocked on the door late in the evening. When there was no answer, she pushed the door open slightly and froze. Inside, she saw Christy and Sam sitting close together on the bed, their hands intertwined. Their heads were bowed in what appeared to be an intimate moment of prayer, but the closeness between them left little room for doubt in Margaret's mind. Margaret backed away silently, her heart pounding. She had seen enough. By the time the retreat ended, Margaret's discovery had spread like wildfire. Though she hadn't openly confronted Christy, she had confided in a select group of women, who wasted no time in sharing the news with others. By the time Christy returned to Lagos, she could feel the shift in the atmosphere at Grace Assembly. People avoided her gaze, whispered in hushed tones when she passed by, and seemed unusually cold. At first she thought she was imagining it. But when Sister Esther pulled her aside after a service, her worst fears were confirmed. "Christy, we need to talk," Esther said, her tone heavy with concern. Christy's heart sank. "What's going on?" "There are rumors going around. About you and Sam." Christy felt the blood drain from her face. "What kind of rumors?" Esther hesitated, looking pained. "That you're too close to her. People are questioning your relationship." Christy's hands trembled as she tried to formulate a response. "That's ridiculous. Sam and I are just friends." But the look in Esther's eyes told her that denial wouldn't be enough to quell the growing storm. Later that evening, Pastor Jackson confronted Christy. He had heard snippets of the rumors, and though he had initially dismissed them, the weight of the whispers had become too much to ignore. "Christy," he said, his voice strained, "I need you to tell me the truth. What's going on between you and Sam?" Christy felt trapped, her chest tightening as she struggled to find the right words. "There's nothing going on," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Jackson's eyes searched hers, filled with both hurt and disbelief. "Then why are people talking? Why does it feel like you're slipping away from me?" Tears filled Christy's eyes as the walls of her double life came crashing down around her. She had spent years hiding her truth, but now there was nowhere left to run. The tension at Grace Assembly had reached a boiling point. Whispers turned into outright confrontations, and the once warm and welcoming church community became a battlefield of judgment and accusations. For Christy, Each Sunday felt like walking into a den of lions. One fateful morning after service, Pastor Jackson called an emergency meeting with the church elders. Christy's heart pounded as she sat beside him in the small meeting room. She could feel the weight of their stares, each one a silent accusation. Elder Mike cleared his throat, breaking the uncomfortable silence. Pastor Jackson, it's no secret that the church has been troubled by recent rumors about Sister Christy and the new member Sister Sam. Christy's chest tightened. She looked at Jackson, who remained silent, his face unreadable. Elder Miriam leaned forward, her expression stern but not unkind. We need to address this, Pastor. The congregation is in turmoil. People are questioning the moral integrity of this church. Jackson finally spoke, his voice strained. What exactly are you accusing my wife of? Elder Mike hesitated before responding. There are allegations of inappropriate conduct between Christy and Sam. We're not here to pass judgment, but the church deserves transparency. Christy felt the room spin. She had prepared herself for this moment, but the reality of it was overwhelming. I have done nothing to disgrace this church, she said, her voice trembling but firm. Sam and I are friends. That's all. Elder Miriam frowned. Then why do so many people believe otherwise? Why are there whispers of secrecy, of intimacy? Christy opened her mouth to respond, but Jackson raised his hand, signaling her to stop. This meeting is over, he said, his tone final. Whatever is going on, we'll handle it privately as a family. The church's job is to support, not to condemn. The elders exchanged uneasy glances but said nothing as Jackson stood and led Christy out of the room. Back at home, the silence between Christy and Jackson was suffocating. He paced the living room, his hands clenched into fists, while Christy sat on the couch, her head in her hands. Tell me the truth, Jackson finally said, his voice raw. Is there something going on between you and Sam? Christy looked up at him, her eyes filled with tears. She wanted to deny it, to cling to the fragile threads of their marriage, but the weight of her secret was too much to bear. I don't know how to explain it, she whispered. I care about her, more than I should. Jackson's face crumpled, and he sank into a chair. How could you do this to us? To me? To the church? I never meant for this to happen, Christy said, her voice breaking. I've been struggling with these feelings for years, Jackson. I thought I could suppress them, but... He looked at her, a mixture of anger and heartbreak in his eyes. You should have told me. You should have trusted me. Christy wiped her tears. I was scared. Scared of losing everything. And now I have. Meanwhile, Sam was facing her own storm. She had noticed the cold stares and whispers at church, and it didn't take long for her to realize that their relationship was no longer a secret. One evening, Christy showed up at her apartment, looking more broken than Sam had ever seen her. They know, Christy said, her voice hollow. Everyone knows. Sam pulled her inside, closing the door behind her. What happened? Christy sank onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. The elders confronted Jackson. He's devastated, Sam. I've ruined everything. Sam sat beside her, wrapping an arm around her shoulder. You haven't ruined anything, Christy. You're just being honest about who you are. But at what cost? Christy sobbed. I've hurt Jackson, I've destroyed my reputation, and the church. They'll never forgive me. Sam sighed, her heart aching for Christy. Maybe it's time to step away. From the church, from this life. Maybe it's time to start over. Christy looked at her, desperation in her eyes. But how? How can I leave everything behind? Sam hesitated before responding. Sometimes, holding on hurts more than letting go. The rumors and accusations created a rift within the congregation. Some members stood by Christy, insisting that she deserved grace and understanding. Others demanded her removal, claiming she had tarnished the church's reputation. During a heated Sunday service, an older woman stood up in the middle of Pastor Jackson's sermon. Pastor, with all due respect, how can we trust your leadership when your own house is in disarray? Gasps rippled through the crowd. Jackson paused, his face a mask of barely contained emotion. "This church is built on forgiveness and love," he said firmly. "We do not cast stones at those who are struggling." But the congregation was divided. Voices rose, arguments erupted, and for the first time in years, Grace Assembly felt anything but unified. That night, Jackson and Christy had their most painful conversation yet. "I can't do this anymore," he said quietly. "The church is falling apart, our marriage is falling apart. I don't know how to fix this." Christy nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Maybe it's not meant to be fixed." Jackson looked at her, his expression filled with sorrow. "Do you love her?" Christy hesitated before answering. "I don't know. But I know I can't keep pretending to be someone I'm not." Jackson closed his eyes, his shoulders sagging. "Then maybe it's time for us to go our separate ways." The words felt like a knife to Christy's heart, but she knew he was right. The next morning, Christy announced her decision to step down from her role in the church. "I need time to figure out who I am," she told the congregation, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. "I've spent too long living a lie, and I can't do it anymore. I'm sorry for the pain I've caused, but I hope you can find it in your hearts to forgive me." The church was silent, the weight of her words sinking in. As she walked out of the building, Sam was waiting for her outside. "What now, Mas?" Christy took a deep breath, a sense of freedom washing over her for the first time in years. "Now we start over." The day Christy left Grace Assembly, it felt as though the weight of the world had been lifted from her shoulders, but the road ahead was unclear. She had lost her role as the respected pastor's wife, the support of her husband, and the stability of her carefully constructed life. What remained was a fragile hope, that in this unraveling she might finally find herself. The night before Christy left Lagos, she packed her belongings quietly. Pastor Jackson sat on the couch, watching her with a mix of sadness and resignation. "I don't hate you, Christy," he said softly. She stopped folding a shirt and looked at him, her eyes brimming with tears. "I know," she whispered. "And I don't hate you either. But we both know this isn't what we wanted." Jackson nodded. "I just wish things had been different." "So do I," Christy admitted. "But maybe this is for the best." Their parting was bittersweet, marked by a shared understanding that love wasn't always enough to hold two people together. Christy moved to a quiet town on the outskirts of Lagos, far enough from the city to start fresh. She rented a small apartment, got a job at a local bookstore, and spent her days reading, journaling, and reflecting. For the first time in her life, she had the space to confront her feelings without fear or shame. She thought about the years she had spent hiding, the women she had hurt in her search for connection, and the pain she had caused Jackson. But she also thought about the love she had found with Sam, unexpected and beautiful in its own way. While Christy was carving out her new life, Sam was grappling with her own decisions. She had stayed behind in Lagos, hoping to avoid further backlash from the church. But the whispers and stares hadn't stopped, and she knew her presence only fueled the fire. One evening she called Christy. "Hey," Sam said, her voice soft. "Sam," Christy breathed, the sound of her name like a balm to her soul. "How are you?" "I've been better," Sam admitted. "It's hard being here without you." Christy hesitated. "Then leave. Come join me." Sam was silent for a moment. "Are you sure that's what you want?" Christy smiled. "I'm sure." 2 weeks later, Sam arrived in the small town, a single suitcase in hand. When Christy opened the door to her apartment and saw Sam standing there, she felt a rush of emotions, relief, joy, and a flicker of fear. "Welcome home," Christy said, pulling her into a hug. They spent the first few weeks navigating their new reality. Without the watchful eyes of the church, they were free to be themselves, but the transition wasn't without its challenges. "Do you ever think about what we left behind?" Sam asked one evening as they sat on the balcony, watching the sunset. "Sometimes," Christy admitted. "But I don't regret leaving. For the first time, I feel like I'm living my truth." Sam smiled, leaning her head on Christy's shoulder. Me too. Though Christy was determined to move forward, she knew she couldn't ignore the wounds she had left behind. One day, she wrote a letter to Pastor Jackson. Dear Jackson, I hope this letter finds you well. I wanted to thank you for the years we spent together, for your kindness and patience, and for standing by me even when I didn't deserve it. I know I hurt you deeply, and for that I am truly sorry. I hope that one day you can forgive me, not for my sake but for yours. You deserve peace, Jackson, and I hope you find it. Take care of yourself. Christy. She didn't expect a reply, but sending the letter felt like closing a chapter of her life. Christy and Sam slowly built a new life together. They found a small community that embraced them for who they were, a group of artists, writers, and thinkers who valued authenticity over appearances. Christy began volunteering at a local youth center, sharing her story with young women who struggled to find their voices. You don't have to fit into anyone else's box, she told them. It's okay to be different. It's okay to be you. Her words resonated deeply, and for the first time, Christy felt a sense of purpose that didn't come from playing a role. One rainy afternoon, Christy received a surprise visitor. It was Sister Esther, the kind elder who had always looked out for her at Grace Assembly. I heard you were here, Esther said, smiling warmly. Christy invited her in, feeling a mix of anxiety and curiosity. I'm not here to judge, Esther said once they were seated. I just wanted to see how you're doing. I'm doing better, Christy said honestly. Esther nodded. I'm glad. You deserve happiness, Christy. We all do. They talked for hours, and by the time Esther left, Christy felt a weight lift from her heart. Months turned into years, and the pain of the past began to fade. Christy and Sam's love deepened, built on trust and mutual respect. One evening, as they walked hand in hand along the beach, Christy turned to Sam. Do you ever wonder how we got here? She asked, a smile playing on her lips. Sam chuckled. Every day. But I wouldn't change a thing. Neither would Christy. For the first time in her life she felt free. Free to love, to live, and to be her true self. And though her journey had been filled with heartache and loss, it had also led her to something beautiful, a life of authenticity and a love worth fighting for.